Start. Thank you everyone for joining, and thank you Špela for accepting to present. So Špela Petric is a media artist, very interested in plants, and she made a beautiful work called Play or Ply. I don't know how I should pronounce it, which struck my mind. So I wanted to have her present her more recent work in our seminar. And yes, the floor is yours, Špela.
So thank you very much for inviting me. I will talk a little bit about my practice in general, so we have an idea where also play, I pronounce it play, is coming from, and just at the end briefly talk about my more recent interest. And then I hope we can have an exchange, a discussion to also learn what you are all working on. So I'll share my screen now. So David, can you just give me a sign that you can actually see it?
Yes.
Okay. Super. Okay. So first, a little bit about my background. I'm Slovenian, living in Amsterdam, and I started my career actually as a scientist. So I studied biology and have a PhD in biochemistry and molecular biology. And I got interested in art because I was curious to understand what the importance of scientific work was for the society at large. So looking at this knowledge that we're gaining as scientists from a different perspective. And so throughout my artistic practice, you will see that I very much tap into the knowledge that I learned actually as a scientist, and then recontextualize it. So in 2012 already, I think, I started becoming really interested in plant life, mainly because I had been ignorant of plants all along, and I found it quite interesting or even intolerable to rationally know that plants are such a fundamental element of all our ecosystems, yet we treat them as living material. So I was interested in what lies behind our plant obliviousness or ignorance. And I used artistic methodologies to explore that further. So here on the left, on the right, you can see a picture of a rabbit. And this is a demonstration of so-called plant blindness, because we always gravitate towards what is animal, what is furry, what is cute. But the plants merge into the background, so we don't notice the grass, the dandelions, which are out of focus, or the daisies. So there's several explanations as to why this happens, but one that I find particularly compelling has to do with our Western philosophical tradition, or this metaphysics that uses human as a yardstick to measure all other life against. So we have established certain qualities that are also inalienable rights of humans. And then we look at other organisms to see whether they have those properties or not. So we can look at plants and ask, are they autonomous? Do they have an interiority? Do they have an identity? Is there an essence to them? And if we look at plant strategies, how they live in the world, we can actually start to doubt whether it's not just that we are not ascribing them these qualities. Perhaps their life strategies are such that they're able to manage just fine or even thrive without necessarily having these properties. So we can say the plants are completely open to the environment. Therefore, it's hard to talk about this autonomy. They appear very flat. They don't have any internal organs. Their identity can also be questioned, because we can take a leaf of a plant, pluck it in water, it grows roots, and we have a clone. So all of these properties, I would say that the plants don't necessarily have, yet they do just fine. And this questions whether our metaphysic is actually solid, not that the plants are inferior to us. So it's questions like these that I dealt with in this first series, Confronting Vegetal Otherness, where I wanted to explore plant-human relationships at different scales and observe, what other properties come to light when we reenact these really common relationships, but in an artistic setting. So the first experiment, called Scotopoesis, was a durational performance where I tried to step into the perceptual milieu of a plant. And so some of you might be familiar with this so-called semiotic triangle, which is the basis of communicating and understanding also language, human language. And here I wanted to attempt to enact this semiotic triangle quite consciously, where I would, as a human, step into the perceptual milieu of the plant and become this object that the plant looks at through the sign, and the sign would be the shadow that I cast onto the plant. And to prove that the plant is actually perceiving me and actually acting as an interpretant, we would need some proof, and this would come in the form of etiolation. Etiolation is a process where the plant changes its internal composition. It fades to, well, it doesn't fade, but it becomes, it changes its body in response to low light conditions. So it becomes a little bit more stretched, a little bit lighter. And so if I persisted in the gaze of the plant for long enough, it would react to my shadow that I was casting by changing its shape. And therefore, I would have some proof that the plants perceived me. And so I did this for 20 hours. And after 20 hours, illuminated from behind, from the projector light, we could see sort of this shadow that is now become imprinted in the field of Dale cress. So Dale cress is this small, really fast-growing plant that you otherwise put on sandwiches or in a soup. But this was an experiment of the so-called intercognition. And in line with this concept of exploring plant-human relationships on different scales, I also did this strange experiment called phytoteratology, where I attempted to make plant-human monsters, but not genetically modify plants to contain some human gene, but rather consider whether I could, with the use of science, help bring to term plants, plant babies that would be somehow in the process of their gestation, informed by my body. So I use this scientific protocol called somatic embryogenesis, where, you know how in reproduction, you have an egg, and then in human reproduction, you have a sperm, and after the moment of conception, you get a baby that is growing. So usually it's growing in a uterus, in a womb, and the process of growing it in an artificial womb is called ectogenesis. So here, the incubator in this project, what you see, these glass incubators, that would be an ectogenetic process. So the artificial womb was this glass incubator. And then also in plants, similar to how human conception happens, they also have like pollen that reaches the plant egg. And then the embryo develops inside a seed. So in this project, instead of the embryo developing inside a seed, there was a special protocol where basically you create plant stem cells, where you confuse the plant, it reverts into some sort of primordial cell form, and then it can start to evolve into a whole organism, as if the moment of conception happens. So in a way, these plants, and you can see them on the left lower corner, these are plant embryos, which usually only occur inside the seed. And here they happen in an incubator. So I did this process with this plant, Arabidopsis thaliana, but the incubator, even though it was not inside my body, it contains hormones that I isolated from my body, so from the urine. And in this experiment that would very much fall into the realm of bioart, I conceived a baby plant using parts of my molecular biosemiotic capacity. And this was a way of also, questioning how are we actually keeping the channels of communication between humans and plants open. Clearly, even though we can talk to plants, we are constantly communicating with them through the molecules we give off, through how we eat plants, and they are shaping our bodies in the process. So it was experiments like these that made me realize that somehow our conception of plants as completely opposite of humans has a lot to do with still the way that we see ourselves as separate, by relying so much on our higher cognitive capacities, on this language. And yet we are still co-evolving with them. So on a molecular level, on a bodily level, we are very much sort of in communication and still similar to plants. So after or while doing this series of works on plant-human intercognition, we also, our society entered the age of so-called surveillance capitalism, where technology and algorithms penetrated our lives to the extent that we had to start wondering what is happening with this concept of human autonomy and human identity, when so much of what we do, how we behave, what we choose politically, is now somehow manipulated through the use of algorithms. In coming from the realm of biomedicine, molecular biology, I already know how statistics, how understanding biological processes from the perspective of mathematics can actually be a very good predictor of how something as complex as life is going to behave. I'm not necessarily content with reducing life to something that can be approximated with an equation that has different consequences. But the fact is that it's not just plants that are being manipulated in this way. It is also people. So with this insight, I kind of introduced the concept of the vegetariate to my work. With the vegetariate refers to plants as workhorses. Originally, this term was introduced by Catriona Mortimer Sandilands. But what I saw as something that brings a different perspective on these topics of life and algorithms is that from the perspective of the algorithm, from the way that computational cultures sense their environment, they're quite indifferent to the organisms or the phenomena that created the data, which then they work on and create information. In other words, the bodies, whether they be human or plant or anything else, caught in the gaze of the algorithm is flattened. Algorithms are indifferent. And in that way, in other words, in the eyes of the algorithms, the plants. So if my artistic research started with the question, how can we bring plants from the background of human activities forth? With the introduction of this mass of big data and this kind of interfacing of our behavior, or manipulating our behavior through the algorithms, I came to the conclusion that we are now, from the perspective of the algorithm, already on the similar ontological plane. So became allies in regards to computation. And this is a very productive point of departure for artistic investigation. From this insight onward, you'll see that I started treating plants more as humans and making machines for plants, as if I could legitimately ask myself, if I were a plant, or from the perspective of the plant that I am, what kind of technological choices would I like to be made for me? You know, what kind of assumptions would I be comfortable with this the robots making about me? What kind of AI would I like to have written for me? I hope that makes sense. So in this next series called The Plant Machine, I was basically playing around with interfacing plant life with algorithms, with AI algorithms, and injecting this relationship with also some humor, observing the artifacts of the relationships. For the Institute of Inconspicuous Languages, Reading Lips, I asked myself the question, plants are talking all the time, so what are they saying? And with a gesture of this humor and, you know, going with our human desire to understand plants in terms of language, I tapped into a phenomenon that all plants have, which are leaf pores. So on the lower right side, you can see these structures that are green. They have their small slits. And these open and close, they're microscopic structures. Basically, they're holes into the body of the leaf, into the body of the plant. And the plants can actively open them or close them. And with this, they use them like mouths or noses. So it's used for the exchange of air. So, you know, the process of photosynthesis requires CO2, which plants, with the help of light, then fix into organic substances, namely sugar. But they also breathe, so they need oxygen for just regular breathing. Of course, plants also require water, and with the water that they suck up from the ground, they also carry nutrients. So the flow of water through the plant is not just to keep them nice and moist, but also to get nutrients. If the air is too dry, if it's too hot, they lose too much water, and they require these so-called stomata to control how much water they lose and how much air they exchange. That is just to say that they actively control these stomata. So this project is about reading plant lips. So if you take this microscopic image of the stomata, that open and close and do a time lapse, you can actually see them moving as if there were mouths. And this is a process called apophenia or parapheidolia, so misrecognizing a pattern, like seeing faces in clouds. So we have to extend our imagination and to be able to see these as mouths. And funnily enough, it is us that can do this, but also algorithms can mistakenly identify plant stomata as lips and read the lips of what the plants of the plants. So here is the project.
Isto mama. Lahko mogoče ga. Spomodi se vidi.
Whoops, sorry. The plant's gift center starts as a blank slate. Sorry. Okay, are we back? Yes. Are we back? Can somebody give me a sign whether we are seeing this screen?
Yes.
Okay, sorry for that.
Ga.
Okay. So
Spomodi se vidi ga. Mama ga.
This is Bojan Mort, and he's an interpreter for the deaf, and he was reading the lips of plants. And I see that the clip that I used doesn't actually have its AI counterpart trying to do the same thing, and they were in agreement. I think both of them basically just recognized some small segments of nonsensical words. And this project, while humorous, has a message to think about not just whether plants can speak or not, but what are the languages that they're using to talk in. And this also refers back to the previous project with phytoteratology, where my hormones were communicating with plants rather than using just words and language. So finally, I come to this project called Play. PL means plants, AI is AI. And following this question of how I would like to be treated when interacting with an AI robot, if I were a plant, I asked, can we make an AI robot that is able to enter plant time to play with plants? The first question is whether plants can play or not. And I think it's a matter of belief rather than something that can be scientifically proven. But for me, and as play has been conceptualized, I'm not only talking about games that have strict rules, but consider play like how a newborn is learning about their body, about how gravity works, and how everything is new, everything is exciting. And that play is an expression of freedom, which, yes, eventually, teaches you important lessons, like not to touch fire, or if you hit a friend or someone, they will hit you back. I think that plants definitely, not just plants, but all living organisms need this capacity of exploring their freedom, and that so not only be driven by necessities, but that there is an element of joyfulness that is part and parcel to life. I had to make an assumption, although I don't know how exactly plants play. I am convinced that they do, and I had to make an assumption about where this play would manifest. I presumed it would be at the tips of the plants, so at the shoots or at the roots. The roots are, of course, much more difficult to access because they're hidden in the soil. So I went to explore the tips of the plants. What you saw here was a cucumber after a lot of research into different types of plants. I chose to work with a cucumber because it has prominent tendrils. It has many tendrils, which means that none of the single tendrils is absolutely essential for the plant's survival. So every leaf on the opposite side has a tendril with which normally it just sort of explores the environment looking for something to hold on to so that the plants don't crawl alongside the soil, because that's where a lot of fungus lives. So they like to raise themselves up away from the fungus. And as you saw in this small demonstration, which was sort of like a mock-up, I tried to play with the cucumber plants. This is clearly a time lapse, and I was manually moving these sticks to try to interact with the tendrils. But it is very difficult because even though you can potentially see the tendrils moving, so like if you were to stare at a tendril for about 10 minutes, you would see it sort of move. It's almost impossible to keep your attention to the direction of where the tendril is moving. And this is where it makes sense to use AI, because it can bridge the different timescales. So the point was, can we design an AI-controlled robot that enters plant time to play with the tendrils of cucumber plants? And this was during COVID. I assembled this team of engineers and designers and philosophers and makers to try to design this plant-centered robot. And the elements that we used to make it were actually elements that are also used in agriculture. So it's the same type of sensorial apparatus. We used LiDAR to scan the surface of plants, and importantly, you can see that while I was saying that the robot should play with the tendrils, you cannot see the tendrils on the LiDAR scan, which is why we also have an array of 6 cameras that can then visually see the tendrils. So the AI basically was challenging to make because first of all, usually the AI programs like reinforcement learning and all these new AI approaches often rely on big data sets. And as this was a custom AI, we didn't have access to a big data set. And the first suggestion of the programmers was to model the plant. And that's exactly what I wouldn't want to have done if I were the plant. As Špela Petrič, I don't want an assumption about how I am, a poor estimation of a model of me. So the programmers were pushed further to see if this interaction can be done with very sparse data and still trying to interact with plants without precisely knowing what play is for plants. They came up with this neural network, an AI that was driven by curiosity. Basically, it takes the scan of the LiDAR scan of the surface of the cucumbers and trains to predict the changes on the surface. It retrains the model every 4 hours. And then where it identifies areas in this grid of 36 squares where it has been learning or forgetting the most. So it looks for changes. And then it basically goes explore these changes with what the robot has as its effectors And these are 36 bouncy balls, which it can control by moving up and down. And then, as I said, the LiDAR doesn't actually see the tendrils. So there's another set of an array of cameras, and these cameras are trained, or the robot is also trained by the cucumbers. When there is a successful interaction, there's sort of a reinforcement on the position of the ball. So you have the LiDAR that decides, or in the model training, the curiosity-driven AI, that decides where the balls will be dropped, and then this 6 array of cameras and the tendrils successfully grabbing on that train the AI at which height the balls will be dropped to. So this is the view from the cameras, and you can see here the halo around the ball corresponds to successful contact with the ball. This also means that, or signals the AI to stop moving that ball, because we don't want a sort of marionette action. What we want is, once the cucumber grabs on, that ball stops moving. So gradually, as the installation unfolds, or as time goes by, the full degrees of freedom gets smaller and smaller, and both the cucumbers are reaching and climbing on the tendrils of the robot, being stuck in place. And the robot is also losing degrees of freedom because it can move less and less balls because the cucumbers are attached to them. And by now, I'm sure you're curious what this looks like for a human. Again, this is time lapse. You can see the balls moving at approximately the same speed as the tendrils of the cucumbers are moving. And you can sort of gaze at this interaction. And what I really like about this project is that it uses algorithms in math that come from a certain epistemology of knowing whether a prediction is correct or not, because you can check with the real world. And here it's trying to play with cucumber plants, and there is actually no way of knowing whether this interaction is play or not. So as a concept, it escapes the epistemology whose elements it's using to make this interaction possible. And thereby it's also challenging, the sort of the limits of what we use AI for, as well as, of course, it's introducing plants as completely fully alive agents with the possibility of pleasure and joy that comes with play. So finally, for the last maybe 10 minutes, I'll talk about where this type of exploration of the plant machines has taken me and what I'm doing nowadays. So, I started working with vegetables, with the cucumbers in play, but I became really curious about how this technology, which is supposedly used in precision agriculture, is actually affecting the plants that we eat. And for me, the food that we consume connects us with this technology. So it's not just us being surveilled for, like our behavior as we interact with the computer, but it's also growing the food that we eat and therefore changing our bodies. And, probably you're very well aware of this quote. Can you hear me? Okay. By Donna Haraway, that technology is not neutral. We're inside of what we make, and it's inside of us. So here, concretely, I'm trying to connect us to this these algorithms that surveil living bodies that we eat, and therefore they somehow surveil us in many ways. So I became interested in this infrastructure that grows our food. And Accoltiu Siparica infrastructure can be understood as an operational bundle of technologies that is also part of a political economy of innovation that aims to reformat the city according to the ideals of a city as computer. And here I was hinting at this already before, with the vegetarian, how actually we have to see the world, see life as being able to be reduced or translatable to computation, for computation to be able then to give us predictions and help us control the environment. What happens is that with the advent of technology, we are also accommodating the environments for the environments to be legible by this technology. There is a sort of like a recursive influence. And I think that greenhouses, so I live in the Netherlands now, and this is one of the major exporters of greenhouse technology. You can really see the greenhouse as a controlled space that is very regular and that has this huge possibility to operationalize everything within the greenhouse, to be legible and manipulable by technology. And this is what they are really great at innovating on here in the Netherlands. So this is what I've been exploring, these imperceptible digital infrastructures, to try to understand how are these tomatoes observed, and how is their environment and their growth intervened in with these machines, with this whole ecosystem. And just to give one example of the approach to trying to grasp something that is objectively imperceptible, I'll give you the example of the plantalizer robot. So it was developed by Horticulture, and it's a robot that is attempting to assess the product that is available in the greenhouse every single day, so that the farmer, the worker, the grower has a report on the amount of tomatoes that are available in the greenhouse at any given moment and their ripeness. So this is a robot with 6 cameras. You can see that they are stereoscopic, so they can see the position in 3D. And it's on a trolley, and this trolley rolls back and forth along the rows of tomatoes. And it takes a photo every 6 photos every 10 centimeters. And then on board, there's a small computer that actually analyzes the individual tomatoes, the trusses, and categorizes them into groups of 1 to 12 according to the color red. So red stands in for ripeness. So I was able to get access to this huge data set, training data set about these so-called operational images. Operational images are a really important concept here. They are part of our in-visual culture, because although they are images, they're never looked at by people, or most often not by people, because they're immediately analyzed for information. They immediately become data points. So it's only because I was able to speak with the developers that I was able to get access to these images, and then also allow you to see them. So assemble them, and you can see that this is a really big data set. What is really interesting here is that individual tomatoes, well, not tomatoes, but what we see here is a row, the same segment of a row of tomatoes, and each row, well, the vertical presents time. So each row is a separate day. And if you look at the images vertically, you can see the gradual ripening of the tomatoes, but you can also see the labor that is being performed. So the tomatoes are being picked, the leaves are being removed, and the whole plant is being lowered, because that's how the tomatoes grow in greenhouses. So at the end of the season, tomato vines are 12 meters long, but the ripe tomatoes are always at the same height to allow for easy picking. So the tomato grows at the top, and every week they lower the top by 10 centimeters. So you have this really, really long vine, which is basically the stem that has had the leaves removed. And then you have like 3 or 4 meters of actual tomato vines with the tomatoes conveniently positioned at this kind of human level. So it allows for easy picking. And finally, this is a glimpse into what kind of data this robot collects. So you can see each tomato is numbered, and there's a bounding box around it, so it knows how many tomatoes are on each truss, their location in 3D, and of course the all-important classification according to the ripeness of the tomatoes. And for the purposes of art, the intervention here, I think, is really important. That is really important is to bring these operational images into the public space. So from September to November 2024, while VAR was being renovated, I had these huge prints attached to the scaffolding. So for those who might have heard of VAR, maybe they're partners, this is the oldest non-religious building in Amsterdam. It used to be the city gates. It's where prices were negotiated, like commodities were weighed, where the guilds had their meetings. So it's an economically, historically very important building. It's also where trials were being held, and it has the anatomy, the Theatrum Anatomicum, the anatomy theater, where the people who were executed were also dissected for the public to learn about the insides of the body. Nowadays, it's a tourist attraction. It's also the seat of VAR, who is a cultural institution that I collaborate with often. And this work also did in collaboration with them. So to have publicly displayed operational images from, let's say, something that is otherwise publicly invisible has absolute influence on our daily lives, because we go to the supermarket and we buy these tomatoes that were grown in this very way. To have this present publicly on this location that harkens back to also how through trade and colonialism, the Netherlands has wielded global power in the past, and how it wields global power today. It's also like a very symbolic and important gesture. And this concludes my presentation. So thank you very much for listening, and I will stop sharing.
Thank you very much, Špela. Really great presentation. Are there some questions? I see Lennon raising his hand.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, first of all, really, really nice presentation, really inspired. It is, I never heard, I have a agronomy background, then I love plants too, but I never heard someone try to play with the plants really like experimentally. It was amazing, mind-blowing. Then I was curious, could you get some information about the plants playing with the balls, like if it was a correlation of the ball movement and the plant movement? This is my first question. And second question, was I saw you use cucumbers, and I used to work a lot with grape wines, and it was really crazy how much they grow. Also, the same extruder like the cucumbers, and even if you cut, they manage to grow again to kind of hold, even if they are held by humans like artificial, they grow again to try to hold it themselves. Then I think it was really cool. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks. I think you won't like my answer too much because I truly think that whether this is not whether this is play or not, and how it behaves, you know, it's really difficult to have any claims without sitting down and doing sort of a scientific analysis, you know, and that would involve, again, statistical analysis, you know, keeping notes and so forth. So what I have are just like anecdotal observations or things that are more like figments of my imagination, you know, whether it prefers balls of a certain color or not, you know, and like how it can also decide, it starts wrapping around something and then change its mind, you know, changing its mind. You see, we're using these human phrases. I did not do that. So I left this open to the interpretation of the people. What I found maybe most striking and funny, and has nothing to do with, or I don't know what it has to do with plants, or when this work has been on display now on and off for 5 years already. So a lot of generations of cucumbers were playing with the robots. The most fascinating was when in ZKM, the exhibition was really long, like for 6 months. And I come to exchange the cucumbers because their lifespan is like about 2.5 months, 3 months max. And I find that I always thought that somehow the robot will force the shape of the cucumbers by offering the tendrils. And I came and I saw that the metal wires, the stainless steel wires, were coiled like the cucumber coils. How that happens to this day, I don't know. I have a theory that perhaps the robots didn't stop as it should, moving the thing up and down, and then if the cucumbers were hanging on somehow, this could make, you know, like this coil of the metal wires happen. But yeah, that was maybe the most unexpected and poetic moment where, you know, it wasn't the machine that was shaping the cucumbers in its image, but it was the cucumbers that were shaping the machine in its image. But again, you know, very poetic. And I think that there is something to be scientifically also explored, but you have to be a little crazy to insist on this. And there are crazy people like this. For example, Stefano Mancuso and Monica Galliano, who are, Monica is evolutionary ecologist, and she did a lot of interesting experiments with plants to prove that they learn, that they're able to make decisions based off of past experiences, basically that they have adaptive behavior, because unlike most biologists that look for organs that have the capacity and then, you know, explore the capacities, she said she was departing from plants have these capacities because they have survived, and for a living being to be able to interact with the environment, they have to solve these issues. So let's first demonstrate that they solve issues, and then we'll try to figure out how they do that without having a heart, a brain, and, you know, like this classical animal parts. So she did really interesting experiments on mimosa plants, sort of training them, dropping them for a little while, and then after a certain time, because mimosa putida, I think it's a sensitive plant. When you touch it, it folds its leaves, but, you know, this process requires energy, and then it has to spread the leaves again. So such a costly thing should have some biological function. And she was dropping the plants for 10 centimeters, and eventually they adapted. They learned that this particular signal is not a threat, so they stopped responding. So when she would drop them, they would still have the leaves open. And they retained this learned insight for up to a couple of weeks. Whereas like when the rain fell on their leaves, they would close them. So it was a distinct type of external signal that they wanted to. And similarly, she also asked associative learning of peas. So the peas were actually trained to solve Y mazes, to associate the direction of the wind with light. Stuff like this. So there are, there are interesting scientific experiments that could be conceived and tested on plants, which is not what my job is. So I didn't actually take it in that direction.
Yeah, but thank you very much. Your job is also really interesting. It looks scientific too. It's scientific. I love also the stomach is speaking, looking like a Lady Gaga singing, but it looked really, really, really cool. Congratulations. Thank you for the speech.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there other questions? Well, I have one maybe on the line of what you said about the coiling of the cables. Like during the exhibitions, could you see when there was more control by the plants or more control by the machine? Is there a way to say when control switches from one to the other? Or?
I can't say. All I know is that somehow it is not absolutely without survival necessity, because when we had a glitch in the program and the balls didn't reach the plants died. So in fact, they need some sort of interaction. I know that's not answering your question, but I absolutely have no idea, and I couldn't actually place the relationship between the plants and the machine as a way of control. I see it as like a creature, because unlike a lot of other algorithms, this interaction between the plants and the AI and like the robot is one of a kind. So it has only been developed for this particular relation. And it's because I have no, sets of experiments with, different deployments. There are several generations of cucumbers. But for me to be able to tell anything like who manipulates whom or has control over, I think I would need to have variations of this setup, and it's just like a one-off.
Okay.
Yeah.
And also another question on the stomata opening. Like, is there a way to control the opening? Like, did you deprive the plants from water to get more motion, or?
No, actually, it's with light. The light, they are triggered by light. So there are several factors overlapping. It's also a very interesting system because it's a sort of a zero scale system. So you have stomata there's tens of thousands on every leaf, and yet they respond very precisely and also statistically appropriately, even though there's nothing centralizing their opening and closing. So scientists actually do not know how this control is achieved, even though it is very statistical. what opens the stomata is light, because that makes sense. Because as soon as there's intense light, the photosynthesis starts, so it needs air. But then what tends to close it is, of course, the absence of water. So the relative humidity, how much water it has in the substrate, but also other factors like pathogens. So if you have some bacterial infection or like some signals from pathogens will close the stomata, because the stomata are basically holes into the body. So it wants to protect itself, and it closes the stomata if there is an onslaught of pathogens. But what I also had was intense light that was turning on and off, and that also makes them open and close. And they close quite quickly, within 5 to 10 minutes.
Okay. And another question, like I felt I was very interested in your notion of operational image, and I felt like there are some plants which have which are more easy to turn into operational images than others. Like tomato, you've got the red color, which is very and so. Do you think maybe it will make a difference in, well, depending on this criterion, whether it has good operational images or bad operational images, we will grow them differently, and we will push toward production of plants which have more operational images?
Yeah, I think this actually has a lot to do with how technology is being developed in general. So because this is all within sort of innovation and investment framework, the companies tend to go for the low-hanging fruit, first of all, which is, yes, go for that which is really easy to discern and to provide, not necessarily the technological solutions which would make the production of, let's say, tomatoes easiest, but what is doable, what is feasible within what technology currently offers. And that's why we also see sort of like jumps in what products are offered with AI and these kind of convolutional networks. A whole different type of digital twin is on the horizon. Not quite there yet, but like the analysis, the segmentation of plants, as well as predictive modeling, changes dramatically once you have the capacities of AI. It's still difficult for them to make the link. But my point here is that absolutely yes. And this goes back to this kind of feedback loop between the environment of the greenhouse and the technology that is developed, and the bodies of the tomatoes and the technology that is developed. The strains of the tomatoes that are grown in the greenhouse wouldn't really exist very well out in the open. They have been biologically selected to suit this particular type of environment and this particular type of growth. The tomatoes were dramatically changed in the 40s when mechanization was introduced for picking them, when they were growing out in the open fields. The criteria was no longer just the taste, but it had to be tough. It had to be really strong, because the machine wasn't as gentle as human hands picking it. And so like what I'm trying to say is that there is always this back and forth between technological innovation, which makes certain aspects of agriculture easier, and then everything has to adapt as well. So the body of the plant, but then also us as consumers are in the same loop. So for a really long time, because it was easiest to grow tomatoes that were tough, there was a tendency, and also because everybody was paid according to weight, we were faced with getting water bombs. That's a tomato that is very much deprived of flavor. So now what they're doing is trying to engineer flavorful tomatoes and strike a balance, because consumers were complaining. And again, so it's always kind of like a back and forth between the technology, what is easy for technology, and then what is produced, and then our feedback that we give as consumers. Yeah. And that's basically what I'm interested in. I'm interested in like the artifacts of AI on living bodies.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there would be a nice work to do to try to rate the vegetables based on their operationability or something like that. It would be interesting, I think. Okay. Are there any other questions? If not, I think we can close here, and thanks again, Špela.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm very happy of your presentation. Thank you very much, and see you all next week. Goodbye.
Bye.